Right. Welcome, everybody. We've got a lot to discuss. Just had a trade go down just as I'm preparing. Daniel Tice from the Pelicans to the Thunder. This gets them below the tax. They were just like 1.4 million above. And this will get him below. OKC had an open roster spot, so they could take him in. Maybe he becomes a buyout candidate. He'd be able to sign with just about everybody. Just making sure I got everything good on my stream. Yeah, I think I'm good to go. Oh, I just got to post this on Twitter. Give me a sec. All right, we're good to go. Sweet. All right, so we've got a lot to discuss. Like I said, if you're just tuning in on Twitter, we just had a quick trade. The Thunder acquired Daniel Tice from the Pelicans. That'll get the Pelicans under the tax. Maybe he becomes a buyout guy, but the Thunder could use another big man, so I guess he might even stick around for the year. But just in case the Thunder want to do a couple other things, they still have some space below the tax if they want to facilitate any other salary dumps. That's a pretty easy one. But let's start with the big one. So the Middleton Kuzma trade. So this is one I said yesterday. I had a feeling that wouldn't happen. I think I straight up said that it wouldn't happen, mainly because a lot of Bucks stuff doesn't leak, and a lot of their stuff comes out of surprise. This was one that was out in the ether for about since yesterday, and it ended up happening. So I'll pull up the details really quick. So it's going to be Chris Middleton, AJ Johnson, and a pick swap for Kyle Kuzma, Patrick Baldwin, and I think it's a 1 second round pick. So I'll just start off as far as like the value, because this definitely feels pretty underwhelming for the Wizards. They signed Kyle Kuzma to this deal. It's a 4-year deal. It's declining every year. And the whole idea is that a team interested in getting a guy like Kuzma, he's on a very team-friendly, cost-controlled deal, and it declines every year. And now the deal's almost halfway done, and they're going to lose a lot of that benefit, whoever acquires him, in which case it's the Bucks. So they get him for pretty low, I think. It's mainly a pick swap. It's a 2028 pick swap, which I got the reporting a little wrong because I know they already traded a pick swap to the Blazers as part of the Damian Lillard trade, but it seems like that I got the whole like how the structure is going to be wrong. But basically, they're probably not going to convey a 28 swap to the Blazers, in which case this is probably going to go to the Wizards. So the Wizards will have a chance to swap this pick if the Bucks are worse than them in 2028. The Bucks only had 1 second round pick left before this, and now they have 2. So, just a little bit on their draft pick situation. They do have 2 second round picks left to trade. I believe they're out of swaps now, and they have that 1 first round pick to trade in 2031. Not sure who is worth it out there for them to send that out. Also, a pretty big financial benefit for the Bucks. They came into this about $22 million over the tax, and they had a $75 million tax penalty, and they were over the second apron. So they will get a lot of financial relief from this. For this year, I plugged in Kyle Kuzma. Now his whole this is an estimate of what his salary will be. With the Wizards, he was $22.5 million, but he does have a trade bonus that's going to boost it up. Per Bobby Marks, he's going to take a smaller amount of it. We don't know exactly what, but he estimated in another tweet. Well, he said in another tweet that they're going to be about $300,000 below the second apron at the end of this. So I put together an estimate of what that might be. He's also got some incentives that are going to be deemed likely. So he gets like over $2.5 million in like boost it into his salary. He had a $7.5 million trade bonus. That was the full value if he got the whole thing in for the next 3 years. But it looks like, based on what Bobby's saying, it's probably going to be closer to like little over 1 million per year. So it goes down to like 3 million, which is still a pretty good amount of free money considering all you have to do is get traded. So this will boost your tax down to 45 million approximately. So all in total, about 36 million in savings this year. And I got them right below the second apron. So this might not be the exact salary that Kuzma has now at the end of the trade, but just an estimate of what that might be. And they should probably generate a little trade exception, something like 4 million, which they could use this year. If they're below the aprons next year, they could potentially use it next year. But at this point, I don't expect them to increase payroll. They're probably going to want to stay below the second apron. Teams that are above the second apron by the end of the season, they're going to have their 2032 draft pick frozen. The Bucks wouldn't be able to trade it. They wouldn't be able to trade it anyway, since they already traded. Well, no, they could actually. They could, if they get into next season, they still have their 2031. They have the option to trade their 31 or 32. But in terms of trying to extend their window with Giannis as long as possible, they're going to want to try to keep all their drafts in the far out years eligible to be traded. But also at the same time, the Bucks are very year by year at this point. Everything they're doing is to try to extend another year of Giannis Lillard's window, and we don't know how long that is. So they bring in Kuzma, who's younger than Chris Middleton, but definitely not as good, especially this year. I knew that Kuzma was not playing that well this year, but man, 28% from three, that's actually like even below. He's already not a very good shooter. This is like well below his standards already. And this is with Middleton, with his injury history. And I understand the Bucks deciding, this is something I alluded to in the last stream, that, okay, the Bucks might just think that Middleton's knee, ankles, leg, whatever is going on in his legs, his lower body, is not going to hold up come playoff time, even though I'm pretty sure he was on the court last playoffs when Dame and Giannis were both injured. But even then, having a better offensive year than Kuzma. I haven't seen how he looks defensively or anything like that, but just seems like the Bucks wanted to reset the clock, and they bring in a guy who's this is the big buy low. They're betting on Kuzma bouncing back from this, and I'm sure. So he's got 2 years left on his deal. He will probably play better than what he's doing right now, but this puts a much bigger offensive burden on Dame, because Middleton's the only other guy that can handle the ball and create his own shot. So I would imagine they're not done. They're probably going to be trying to get maybe another scorer who can help take the load off Dame in the playoffs. But Kuzma really is going to have to rebound from this. But at the same time, all they gave up was a first round pick swap. So if he pans out, it's a pretty good value proposition for the Bucks. And then I want to look ahead into the Bucks situation. Here's another reason why they wanted to do this. So like I mentioned, Kuzma, he's got that descending contract. So here I plugged him in for Middleton. Again, estimated salaries for him. This is what Giannis and Lillard's maxes are projected to be. They'll most likely beat these amounts. And right now, even though they have two $50 million players and Kuzma, and the pending player options, the Portis and Connaughton, they're going to be about $25 million below the tax. And keep in mind, the Bucks have paid about, after like once you get to the end of this season, they're going to have paid like $250 million in tax in these past 5 seasons since 2021 when they won the championship. So I want to see, how does a Brook Lopez return factor in? So I just put in the salary. I get the feeling like that Brook will probably be looking at some sort of a pay cut next year. Let's say he gets like $15 million and both Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton pick up their player options. they're looking like they could be in a position to avoid this luxury tax for the first time in like 5 years, which would, on one hand, be a pretty big relief for ownership. And we're going to get into, this is the big trend that a lot of teams are just saving money right now. Whether you agree with it or not, this is just a reality. But at the same time, if they are set on avoiding the tax, then they're probably going to want to try to figure out what to do with Bobby's and Pat's salaries. Try to get a little deeper if possible. If you can get multiple guys who in total combined for these two guys' salaries, so get a deeper roster, and you're going to deduct the tax. Okay, I understand. But just something to point out that they're getting a lot of financial flexibility over this year, this following season. And we'll see after that, they'll still have one more year of Kuzma on a declining salary. It'll be like $20 million once you get to the 2026-27 season. As for Washington, they will take, they're going to absorb a good amount of salary in this trade. So they came into this with a decent amount of tax flexibility. I wrote about them on Third Apron about how they've got a good amount of, they were $12 million below the tax, below the trade. They've got a $12 million trade exception. They still have some mid-level exception, and they just have trade flexibility. They can increase payroll, take back some draft assets. So they go and do this trade. I plugged in Middleton, his $31 million. You got AJ Johnson's 2.8. So they took on a lot of salary, going from Kuzma's 23.5 to Middleton's 31, and then a little bit from going from Baldwin's. He makes a little less than AJ Johnson. So now they're 4.1 million below the tax. So they're very close to it. They're not going to want to surpass that. They're going to want to. They're probably not done though. They're probably going to try to do an additional trade while trying to stay below the tax. And I bring this up because there were also rumors yesterday about how the Wizards might be negotiating with the Suns to get Nurkic, which is a trade I proposed last week on one of my streams, which would save the Suns a ton of money. Now it's a little trickier because if the bare minimum they could do to get Nurkic while standing Valanciunas out would be Valanciunas and just one more minimum guy like Anthony Gill. That would get it done. But then that would put them over the tax. So at this point, either it's going to be a more dollar for dollar trade, in which case the Suns aren't really saving any money, or there's going to be an extra team involved that can help both the Suns and Wizards with their financial goals. And I would imagine the trade would be Nurkic. They send one of those 3 first-round picks that they got by breaking, by the Suns breaking up that 2031 first to get off Nurkic as money for next year and just save a lot of money. It would save the Suns a lot of money. We'll see if that ends up happening. So that's their situation here. So I don't think they're done. As far as next year is concerned, they were looking at having a lot of cap space below this before this trade, about like 30 million. Now they are looking more towards having about like 14. So basically the Wizards just decided, hey, you know what? There's not going to be any good players to pursue. Why don't we use this cap flexibility up now to get the draft assets needed? So instead of having 30 million cap space, they're using up their flexibility now to get this pick swap, bring in AJ Johnson for Kuzma. They've got Middleton's year. It's actually a player option. I've got to fix that. And let's see what else they do. If they do end up bringing Nurkic for Valanciunas, that's going to knock off, like going to increase their payroll even more. So it looks like they're getting out of potentially having cap space for next summer, in which case the Nets might be the only team with cap space in 2025 in this summer. So that is Washington, Milwaukee, that trade. Next up, we have Philly. And this is, I suppose you can call it the Morey special. 3rd year in a row, Sixers get under the tax when they come into the tax over the when they come into the trade deadline over the tax. So yesterday traded Caleb Martin for Quentin Grimes, saved them about $3.2 million. got them a lot closer to the tax. They were like 10 million above, then they're 6.5 million above. Then the reports came out yesterday that the Sixers are taking out KJ Martin. Trade pending was the injury designation, and that they were basically not going to take back any money and just duck the tax. And this is something that I alluded to right when the Sixers re-signed KJ Martin in the offseason, that so the Sixers had his bird rights. They technically could have given him like up to the max if they wanted to. And the whole idea behind that is that if they're going to go make another big trade, try to go after another forward to help complement this roster, you're going to need to be able to have the matching salary to do it. A lot of speculation, maybe he'd get like double what he did, 16 million. But the Sixers correctly gave him this amount. One, it's just close and just low enough where they can conceivably duck the tax, which they ended up doing. And also that amount is just short of the room mid-level exception, which the Pistons have. We'll get into the Pistons side of things of how they might be doing this. But yeah, now they are below the tax. They're about 700 million below. They have an open roster spot. They've got 2 weeks to fill it. And I was talking to my buddy Adam Aronson, Philly Inquirer, I think it's Philly Inquirer, about the possibility that they fill up that roster spot with converting Justin Edwards, which I think, that makes sense. He's been playing a lot for them, and they can wait 2 weeks and they'd be able to just fit him and stay below the tax once that prorated minimum salary. It's going to be less than this amount. They gain another trade exception, which they could potentially use for next season. But yeah, the Sixers, they duck the tax, which just made sense given their whole last season. I will see if they're done. I've seen a lot of speculation that the Sixers did this partly to gain more flexibility for next year, so they could potentially bring back Gershon Yabusele, which I understand that. Now, yeah, Yabu's definitely better than a minimum salary player. He's exceeded that valuation. I don't know if the Sixers need like the full mid-level or anything like that to give him that. Just knowing how tight the market can be for role players. So they're I got them projected about 18 million below the tax, assuming they don't keep their first round pick for next season. So technically, yeah, they can use a good portion of their mid-level to re-sign Yabusele. Keep in mind, though, they also got to re-sign Quentin Grimes. They just brought him in. I really like that trade for the Sixers. I didn't really like it at all for the Mavs. So they've got enough flexibility to bring back both guys, I think, but they'll probably be going into the tax again, in which case we'll probably go through the song and dance next trade deadline. They try to get below it if particularly the team is struggling again. But if they are, then maybe that would lead to more bigger decisions like Paul George, Joel Embiid. We'll see what happens. But I would imagine, though, so the Sixers save a ton of money, which who gains from that? Ownership, obviously. They save like 40 million between reducing payroll, reducing tax, then getting payment from the tax teams that pay all that tax dollars. So it doesn't benefit the roster or anything like that. But if the team is a legit contender next year, I don't think they're going to try to duck the tax or anything. If they're a top 4 seed and they're looking like they have a real shot at making it past the second round, I think they'll pay tax. It just doesn't really make sense to, and then add be in the tax, and then you're adding to your repeater clock. The more you're in the tax, once you're in the tax for like 3 years in a row or 3 of the past 4 seasons, you pay higher rates. You want to delay that as much as possible, but at the same time, this team with Joel, with Paul George, realistically doesn't have like such a long window. Detroit. So they have $14 million in cap space. And the question is, are they going to do anything else before they make this trade? Because they can either take him into their 14 million in cap space, or they can use up their 14 million cap space and take him into their room mid-level afterwards. So they just add more money that way. So this was their payroll before. Here it is now. So I'm just going to assume that, there's no like reporting suggesting they have anything close to doing something before this to use up their 14 million. So if they take KJ into their cap space, they'll have 6 million left. And so they could still bring in another guy. They would have to cut someone though, just to create the roster spot, or maybe do an imbalance trade. Like if you want to trade Tim Hardaway Jr. for someone making $6 million more, they can do that. And then the really interesting thing about the Pistons is, even if they don't make a trade before this, where they use the mid-level to acquire KJ Martin with, they can still aggregate KJ Martin's salary with whoever else they might bring, with any other player on the roster, to bring back someone even more expensive. When you bring in a player with your cap space and stay below the tax, you can do that. So they can already aggregate KJ Martin. Let's say they wanted to, they bring in a $6 million player. They combine that player with KJ Martin. So we're at 14 mil plus Tim Hardaway, 16 million. So you're sending out 30 mil. You can bring back like a $38 million player, just something crazy like that. They could do something like that. So we'll see what they end up doing. I get the feeling it might be a lot quieter. They just bring in guys for draft picks. KJ Martin can definitely help them, but they also got 2 second-round picks for taking him on. So pretty clear-cut deal for the Pistons. Makes sense. Okay, and then we have I'll go over this one quickly, the Jaden Springer trade. So Boston, this was something that was pretty obviously going to happen. They are about 66 million into the tax before this trade, and they're probably going to want to get involved in the buyout market somehow, even though they're not going to be below the first apron, so they can't sign anyone who had the mid-level salary or above. But it just made sense for them to save some money. So by getting off Springer, they reduce it down to 53 million. Now keep in mind that if they do nothing else, they still have to get back to 14 players. So if they wait 2 weeks, which is the maximum they can to be below 14, then it'll be a net savings of about 16 million between the tax and the payroll savings. So they save a good amount of money. I'm keeping an eye on Xavier Tillman, just because when all their bigs are healthy, he is the last big man, like last string big man. He's making a 2-year minimum deal. He's got another year after this. Maybe they want to get off his money as well, because then you can save a lot of money when you replace him with a prorated minimum salary, because that would give a total of like $20 million in savings for the Celtics between dumping both Jaden Springer and Xavier Tillman. Again, not really helping the Celtics, just opening up roster spots, I suppose, for potential buyout guys that they're allowed to sign. So that's just another thing I'm keeping an eye on. Not a great series of transactions for the Celtics, though. They gave up a second-round pick to get Jaden Springer last year. They gave up a second to get off him. We'll see if they end up doing the same type of thing with Tillman. They gave up 2 seconds to get Tillman and last year, and he helped them a lot. So there's definitely no regret on that one, but it might also cost them a second to get off him if that's where they want to go. So that is for Boston. They will also get a trade exception worth $4 million, which I doubt they'll use. Houston, they came into the trade deadline with an open roster spot, and they're about $9.6 million below the tax. Shout out to David Weiner, who reminds me that Dylan Brooks is going to get some incentives that factors into this for them making the playoffs. Otherwise, they would have more tax room. And they have an open roster spot. And I think a lot of people are thinking that the Rockets are going to do something to bring someone in, but they already have such a deep roster at every position. They already have a 10 deep rotation when fully healthy. They don't necessarily need to bring someone who can help them, especially when they've got like 2 or 3 other guys out of the rotation who might be able to help them with all these injuries like we're seeing right now. So you bring in Springer, about 5.6 now below the tax, so they could still make another move to bring in a guy, bring in a second round pick. They will take him in with their mid-level exception. They can use it as a trade exception now. They use their biannual on Aaron Holiday, so they reserve the entire mid-level, which they can use towards bringing in more guys, which would probably require them cutting someone like Jaden Springer immediately, but that's not a big deal. I don't think they have any two-way or any of these. I don't know if they have any of these two-way guys like they're trying to convert. I haven't really heard much about them, but maybe they want to leave a little bit of tax room in case and an open roster spot in case they want to convert one of these guys later while staying below the tax. It's a good piece of business for the Rockets. So that is that. Now, I want to touch more on the Ingram stuff. So this is from Chris Fedor of the Cavs. No, not this. I didn't pull it up. Though this is from Chris Fedor. He covers the Cavs, Cleveland.com, talking about how the Cavs are interested in DeAndre Hunter. There's nothing about Brandon Ingram, but I think this could very well be tied to it, specifically the Hawks having interest in going after Brandon Ingram. So talks about how the trade could be involving Karis LeVert. And that is like an almost clean trade on the Cavs end. They got to give up a little more. So there have been some reporting that the Hawks might be interested in Brandon Ingram. I could see this being expanded to like a 3 or 4 team trade where it would between the Hawks and Cavs, and the Pelicans, obviously, maybe another team, because as I mentioned in yesterday's stream, if the Hawks are going to bring in Brandon Ingram, they basically need to get off DeAndre Hunter and Bogdan Bogdanovic if they want to be able to keep him next year, or else they're going to have a super expensive team over the tax, which they're not going to want to exceed the tax with this team. So here's just like a framework I think that can happen. So this says failed, but that's mostly because this is supposed to have the Pistons sending out KJ Martin on this website. They don't have KJ Martin yet. But this is just like the type of framework I could see happening where the Hawks bring in Brandon Ingram. They probably give up 1 first-round pick, maybe the Lakers one this year or that extra Bucks one they have in 2027 to the Pelicans to get him to trade Ingram. Cavs take Hunter. They send out LeVert and Tristan Thompson. That's just enough for the Cavs to bring in Hunter, but also stay below the first apron because they would be hard capped at the first apron because they're trading up. Pelicans take on LeVert, who's expiring. They get draft equity, and they are able to balance their cap sheet for next year because they already have a pretty expensive roster, even without re-signing Brandon Ingram. And then a team like the Pistons, who have the flexibility, take on a guy, Bogdanovic, who has an extra year. Again, I'm just using the Pistons as a placeholder. I'm always using them as a placeholder because they have this cap space to do something. So they could do an imbalance trade. They probably get some seconds from the Hawks for taking them on. But this is just something I want to keep an eye on. Because that's what came to my head. As soon as I hear DeAndre Hunter to the Cavs, maybe that has something to do with Ingram heading to Atlanta in the end. Jake Fisher was reporting yesterday on his stream how, the Hawks are very serious about Ingram and that they supposedly they've sent Bogdanovic home. So it's like a trade pending type situation. So just trying to connect some dots here. We'll see if this type of framework ends up happening. And then last but not least, KD. So we've heard the rumors that they are probably talking to the Warriors about something. Really interesting details. So this is on The Athletic, Sam Amick, David Aldridge, Anthony Slater. And they talk about how the Suns have a level of interest in Jonathan Kuminga. And then also there was a Draymond Green mention about how the Suns specifically... he has established a relationship with Matt Ishbia from, they're both Michigan State alums. So there could be some. So yeah, he's a player the Warriors. He's a player the Suns are known to covet. So one thing to keep in mind is that if the Warriors end up trading Kevin Durant for a package featuring Draymond Green and Jonathan Kuminga plus whatever else the Warriors need to send out, then they can't get Jimmy Butler. It's really one or the other, because either they're trading Kevin Durant for Jimmy Butler, which that works. They have to decrease salary as an apron team in any trade, so that would work. But then they can't get Draymond Green. They can't do Nurkic plus stuff for Green. That's aggregation. They're not allowed to do that. So it's just something to keep in mind, unless they could also pull off a Beal trade as well. And it just seems more and more unlikely that's going to happen the closer we get to tomorrow's deadline. But the big mention about this is the Mavericks, that they have dreams of adding Durant to pair Davis and Kyrie with. So he wants to remake the Brooklyn Nets of a few years ago, but with AD. This would be absolutely unhinged if this happens, but I also wouldn't rule it out that Mavericks can actually make a competitive deal if the Warriors aren't willing to put up as much stuff necessary, because they've got the matching salary, which I'll get to, but they have their first round pick this year, a 2031 first round pick. They've got a swap, I believe they can trade. So it wouldn't be better than the Warriors' top offer, in my opinion, but it could be something where the Suns might be like, hey, if we have to trade him, keep in mind Kevin Durant, he's got one more year left and then the player option the following year. So he can easily, he's kind of got he's got to stay on his situation right now, knowing that he doesn't have to extend with the Suns. So maybe that could be playing into what's going on behind the scenes. But I do think the Mavs could make an offer that tops the Warriors if the Warriors aren't going deep enough. As far as how the money works, if you saw my stream, well, not a stream, like before I started streaming, I did a video on the Mavs specifically. No, it was on Jimmy Butler and about all the teams that he was initially reportedly having interest in, the Mavs, Warriors. I forgot who the other team was at this point. It wasn't the Suns, Rockets. How each team could get him. And this was before the Luka Doncic trade, obviously, but Anthony Davis makes basically the same amount of money as Luka Doncic, so they could still pull off the same basic framework that they could have done had they kept Luka. The big difference is there was a way for them to keep PJ Washington as well, but now that they brought in AD, PJ Washington's a lot more expendable. So yeah, if you can bring in KD and it costs mostly these guys over here, not Caleb Martin, they can't aggregate him, then you can make it happen. So they can make the money work by trading Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, and Najee Marshall. They can aggregate all those guys. They can't aggregate Caleb Martin or Max Christie, who they just brought in. That would make the money work. I ran the numbers. So here's KD in with Anthony Davis, with Kyrie Irving. You got Caleb Martin, Max Christie. I suppose this is your... so you'd have Lively at the 5, AD at the 4, KD at the 3, and then Christie at the 2, I guess, Caleb Martin off the bench, or if they really want to go super big, they're like the same size, it doesn't matter. So yeah, you've got AD, KD, and Caleb Martin all playing a position down, which I could see appealing to the Mavs. Then they're like really big. And then they need to backfill the roster, so they'd get, they have to sign someone on the trade deadline day. Then they could wait 2 weeks to get the 13 and 14. That 14 spot could be a 10-day. It all works because they just need to stay below the first apron. So just in case you're skeptical on if this KD to the Mavs possibility even is realistic, cap-wise, it could work. They can make it happen. I would bet, though, that he probably ends up on the Warriors. And the Warriors, I think they have a much better offer to package, whether just Kuminga, his inclusion, if he's involved at all, that makes it a lot better for the Suns. Depending how they feel about Wiggins or Draymond, I would say they're probably better than the best player the Mavs have to offer, which would be PJ Washington. Yeah, I think that's for the Suns who want to win now. And then the Warriors can technically send out more draft picks than they can send out like an additional first round pick more than the Mavs can. So yeah, I would probably think it's the Warriors. If that happens, I will have an emergency stream to cover it. Would definitely, and you know, if and when that happens, I still want to get into like the whole Suns aspect. That's going to be a whole disaster. I'm sure they're going to get a lot of scathing reviews for just everything leading up until that point, but we'll just see if it even happens. But it does feel like a lot of momentum shifting towards a possible Durant trade. And yeah, we'll once if and when that happens, I'll be here ready to cover it. So that is everything, my friends. Thank you for tuning in. Please follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm gonna be reacting to trades immediately as they happen, give you my cap breakdown, big picture thoughts. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube so you can know when I'm about to go live. And please subscribe to Third Apron. My newsletter has deep salary cap analysis. I just published some follow-up analysis on the Lakers getting Luka Doncic, on the Spurs getting De'Aaron Fox, and what's next for these teams, how they can add to this group, how they can make it happen in the long run. And make sure to catch up on some of my previous streams. Yesterday, I went over some of the other trades that happened, and I went over Lakers bigs. Who can they get in the short term to help them to have, to salvage this season? The more I think about it, I think the Lakers could make a conference finals run. They just need like just enough at center to make it all work. So yeah, I'll see you guys around. Thanks for watching.